Ms Mitchell, I'm going to allow you to ask questions on some of these issues, but not others. On the first issue, that's the impression that Mr Nelson formed of Shekubio at the beginning. There's already been evidence on this, but I shall allow you to explore it in a little more detail. On the second issue in relation to the shouting, I'm not satisfied that any further exploration of this will assist the inquiry, so I'm not going to permit questioning on that. The third issue relates to the contents of the PERC statement taken on 26 August 2015. I have the point in relation to that, so I do not think it requires any further exploration at this stage. It's something I may be interested in for separate reasons at a later hearing. Fourth issue relates to the visit of Mr Salins. I think that the visit and the way that Mr Nelson was treated have been sufficiently explored, but I will allow you to ask about the card which Mr Salins left. And in relation to the fifth issue, which is whether Mr Nelson made any inquiries as to who disclosed his telephone number, I shall allow you to ask about that. So do you have a clear understanding of the ones I allow you to ask about? So can we have the witness in, please? Mr Nelson, you're going to be asked some questions by Miss Mitchell, who's the counsel for the Shekubio family.
Okay.
Miss Mitchell.
I just wonder if I can ask you a few questions. The first one, I wonder if we can have up on the screen, Ms Drury, the Crown Statement 55, CUPFS 55. And we're looking at the bottom of page 2 of 5. Do you see that paragraph that starts "to start with"?
Yeah.
It says "to start with, he was just walking along normally." I just want to explore with you something that you saw at the time and see if we can get a little more information from you, if you can help us with that. It says, "To start with, he was just walking along normally. It was like he didn't know the police were there. He was just ignoring them. He was walking towards the police officer in front of me. It was like he couldn't tell the police were there." So I want you to just think of that. And then I would also like to take you to your inquiry statement, paragraph 5. And at paragraph 5, your evidence is, "There was nothing obvious to me about why the police were shouting at him. He just seemed to be a guy walking along the street. To me, it seemed as though he didn't register the police were in front of him to begin with, which, looking back, strikes me as odd. The man didn't react, he just kept walking. If someone's shouting and pointing in front of you, particularly the police, my first reaction would be to stop. He just kept walking like they weren't there. He never stopped. The police officers were still shouting and bawling." So, my question for you really is, what was it about Mr Bio that made you think that he wasn't aware of the police? Was there anything about the way he moved or his body language? What was it, if you can help us with that?
If the police weren't there, I wouldn't have battered an eyelid to him, because he was just walking on the opposite side of the road, as countless people do on that street. The only thing that struck me as odd was the weather that day was horrible when he just had a tight white t-shirt on. He was just, it was like he was hypnotised to kid on that there was no one else there.
So what we hear from you is that his clothing was perhaps somewhat out of the ordinary for the weather.
To me, yes, yeah.
And you describe someone who seemed as if they were like hypnotised.
Almost like, or in a trance, as if there was no one there, or he was purposely ignoring them, like as to try blank them out, pretend they're not there. But there was nothing nothing else really that I could. It's quite hard to describe how more I could add to that. Really.
So it was simply because they were interacting with them by shouting.
Yeah.
And
They were getting nothing back. Yeah.
I would like to move on to another issue that you came to close to the end of your evidence, and that was in relation to a card that was left with you.
Well, I can't recall if there definitely was a card left with me or not. Yeah.
I see. Well, in that case, this question might be even more difficult because I was going to ask you about what was on the card.
Right. I'm sure he did. He definitely showed me some kind of. I think you're talking about the John Sallins guy that. Yeah,
yes.
Definitely showed me some kind of ID, and I'm sure he maybe handed me a card. I 100% can't tell you just now. It may have. He may not have. Just something in the back of my mind is there that now that I'm here, I wish I'd kept it, but.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
problem.
for that. The next issue that I'd like to ask you about is when you spoke about the media intrusion, which you were suffering it, and at one point you said in your statement, and I think it was repeated before the inquiry, that you were spooked. You'd received a phone call, and you wondered how they had got your number.
Yeah.
Did you make any inquiries with anyone as to whether or not they'd given your number out?
No, I never asked anyone why. I think I maybe asked when I was giving my statement for the inquiry here. You know, how did they get that kind of information? But I never asked anybody at the time how they got it. Given my naivety, sometimes you're better off not knowing how they get hold of things.
One moment. I've got no further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson, for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. That's the end of your evidence now. I'm just going to rise very briefly so that the setup for the next witness can be established, so you'll be free to go then.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Constable Good. You're going to be asked questions by Miss Thompson, who's the second in from the end of the council. But before we do that, I'll put you on oath. So would you raise your hand, please, and say the words of the oath? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Thompson.
What is your full name, please?
Kayleigh Good.
And you're a police constable?
I am, yeah.
May I ask your age?
I'm 32.
And how many years police service do you have?
I have 7.
Constable, can I ask you to open up the black folder that's in front of you on the table? I want to check that everything is in it that should be, that might help you as you give your evidence this afternoon. There should be a statement in there with the reference number SBPI 00040. Do you see that?
Yes.
I'm going to refer to that as your inquiry statement. I believe that it is a detailed response by you to a formal request by the inquiry for an evidential statement.
Yes.
Is that right? Can we have that up on the screen, please, Miss Drury? And if we can look at the final page, second last paragraph. And do we see that you conclude, the penultimate paragraph reads as follows: I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And do we see that it's been signed by you on the 13th of April?
Yes.
And although your signature has been blanked out on the copy on the screen, in the hard copy in front of you, you should be able to see your signature and satisfy yourself that that's a copy of your statement.
Yeah.
Is that right? So the inquiry statement is evidence before the inquiry already, and I won't go through it line by line, but I may refer to certain paragraphs, and if I do so, they'll come up on the screen. You should also have in the folder, Constable, a statement that you gave to the Police Independent Review Commissioner on the 4th of June of 2015, and that's PERC 000274. Do you see that in the folder in front of you?
Yes.
And do we see, again, it's now on the screen in front of us, that it's a statement that you gave to Investigator Rhodes at Tullyallen Police College?
Yes.
When you spoke with Investigator Rhodes, did you do your best to give a truthful and complete and accurate account of what had happened on the 3rd of May?
I did, yes.
I'm going to call this your PERC statement. So we've got your inquiry statement and your PERC statement. Your PERC statement was given on the 4th of June, a month after the events of the 3rd of May. Your inquiry statement was given or prepared nearly 7 years later. If there are any differences between your PERC statement and your inquiry statement, which should the chair prefer?
My PERC statement.
Is that simply because the events were fresher in your memory
Yes.
in June of 2015?
Yes.
For completeness in your folder, there should also be a short supplementary statement that you gave to the PERC on the 12th of January 2017.
Yes.
Is that there? And also a map.
Yes.
Is the map there too? These are all in front of you, and you can look at them at any time if you would find that helpful as you give your evidence. There should also be a copy of a spreadsheet. I think it's maybe under your folder. And if you can have a look at that for a moment, Constable, you may be aware that the inquiry has footage from the CCTV camera at Gallagher's pub, from dash cams and from mobile telephones, and also police airwaves. The footage and the airwaves have all been aligned for us and against a real-time clock in what we are calling the evidence video timelines, and the timings are accurate to within 1 second. And so this spreadsheet is a record of what is seen on the footage and what is heard on the airwaves. And when we watch the footage, you might find it helpful to have the spreadsheet to hand. I'll talk you through it very quickly. You will see that to the far left-hand side of the spreadsheet, we have timings, both for video and for audio. We then have caller ID, so where airwaves have been transcribed, we can see who made the transmission. We then have a transcript of what is heard in the airwaves, and finally a description of what is seen on the video footage. And for completeness, the column at the very far right, making it Tullyallen Police College. On completion, you were posted to Team 4 response at Kirkcaldy Police Station and completed your first shift on the 6th of April 2015 with Team 4. I want to begin by asking you a few questions about your initial days as a police constable. How many other recruits were on the course at Tullyallen?
I can't remember. I remember it being a big course, maybe in the hundreds.
Okay, 100, 200, more than?
Maybe 100.
100 or thereabouts?
I'm not sure.
And of those police recruits, how many were black?
I don't know.
Take a moment just to think about it. Do you recall there being any black recruits at Tullyallen with you?
Yeah. I couldn't say how many though. I'm not sure.
Can you say if it would have been more than one or two?
I couldn't say exactly.
And of the recruits, how many were from other ethnic minority backgrounds?
I can't remember.
Take a moment and just think about it.
I'm not sure, I'm sorry.
So as at the 3rd of May of 2015, you were a probationer, and your tutor constable was PC Alan Smith. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Am I right to understand that as your tutor constable, he was something of a supervisor, a mentor to you?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you explain in your statement that you'd completed your training, but your practical experience of day-to-day policing was limited in May of 2015. Do I understand correctly that before you completed your training at Tullyallen, you were in fact a special constable?
Yeah.
What does that role involve?
So you basically volunteer your spare time to go out with the regular police. You may do 1 or 2 shifts per week, per month, but you basically have the same powers as a regular police officer, but you don't get paid.
You don't get paid?
Yeah.
Do you have to undergo training?
Yeah.
Is it the same training that regular police officers undergo?
I believe it's changed now, but I think back then it was maybe, I think it was like 6 weeks, but maybe once a week at night. So on like a Thursday night, I think it was.
So one evening a week over about 6 weeks. How long had you been a special constable?
For 1 or 2 years before, I think. But I didn't go out very often.
How often were you going out?
Maybe 4 hours every few months.
Okay, so it was an occasional thing.
Yeah.
And during the time that you were a special constable, had you ever gone to a knife call?
Not that I could remember.
As a probationer, am I right to understand that your first knife call was the 2nd of May 2015, the day before the restraint of Shekabine?
Yeah, that's correct.
That you attended that call with Constable Smith?
I did, yeah.
And that was the one and only knife call that you had ever attended before the 3rd of May?
Yeah, that's correct.
What were the circumstances of that call?
So if I can remember correctly, it was, I think it was a mental health related call. The female was in a care establishment and it had been reported that she was within her room self-harming.
All right. And when you went to the incident, were you and Constable Smith able to resolve it?
Yeah, so I can't remember the full circumstances, but when we went into the room, she's been in possession of a Stanley blade, and we've had to restrain her and remove the blade from her hands.
So that particular call involved restraint.
Yeah.
What sort of restraint?
I think basically, I can't remember exactly, but I think it's just involved us taking hold of her arm, and I think it's maybe PC Smith's taken hold of her arm, and I've removed the knife.
Okay. So you laid hands on her.
Yeah.
But did you require to use handcuffs?
I can't remember if she was, what the outcome was.
Did you require to use your baton
No,
or your spray?
no.
In the past 7 years, I would imagine that you will have attended numerous knife calls in your role as a police constable.
Yeah.
Can you say how many, approximately?
No, I can't remember.
Can you say whether you attend a knife call once a week, once a month?
I don't currently work on a response team, so it's not very often now.
I see. How long were you on a response team?
2 or 3 years.
And during that time, can you help us to understand how often you would go to knife calls?
Maybe once a set of shifts.
And what long a period is a set of shifts?
So like 6 days.
Okay, so roughly once a week? Would
Yeah.
that be fair? And of those knife calls, how many times did you have to use your baton?
I've never used my baton.
Ever?
No.
How many times did you have to use your spray?
Never.
How many times did you have to resort to restraint?
Yeah, a few times.
A few times. And how have you been able to resolve knife incidents without having to resort to baton or spray, and often without having to resort to restraint?
Mostly through my use of communication, speaking with them, trying to get them to drop the knife.
Tell me more about that when you say communication. What is it about the communication that can help you to reach an outcome in a knife call that doesn't involve the use of your baton or your spray or perhaps even restraint?
Like every set of circumstances is different, but the times that I've been involved in, just trying to reason with them, tell them you understand and you're there to help. And in those cases, yeah, they've dropped the knife.
How many of the knife calls that you've gone to in the past 7 years have involved a person who was black?
None, I don't think.
I'd like to look at one of your appraisals from when you were a fairly junior constable. Can we have on the screen, please, PS 01124? And if we look at the front page, do we see that this appraisal relates to you, and it's for the period October 2015 to April 2016?
Yeah.
Just so that we understand precisely what this document is, would you have an appraisal once a year, twice a year?
I think this is an old system. I can't really remember how often it would be.
All right.
The system changes a lot, so.
Well, certainly this review period seems to span roughly 6 months, from the October till the April.
Yeah.
And what was the purpose of having this review?
I can't remember. It was maybe because I was still on my probation.
Okay, and once you complete your probation, do you continue to have reviews from time to time?
As I say, it's all changed now, but I think there was a chance if you'd maybe done something good, they would record it, or at the same time something negative. I think they had a way of recording it on the system.
So perhaps feedback about things you've done well,
Yeah.
things that you might perhaps do better as well and work on in the
Yeah.
future. Is that the purpose of this? All right. Can we look at page 7, please? I'm sorry, can we scroll up? I think I must have the wrong page reference. There is only one block of text that hasn't been redacted. There we are. Thank you. Sorry, I had the wrong page number here. But can we scroll up just a little bit, please, Ms. Drury, to see what it is that was being commented on here. So this is your appraisal, and the heading is effective communication, and the standard of the objective appears to be communicates ideas and information effectively, both verbally and in writing, uses appropriate language and a style of communication that is relevant to the situation and people being addressed, capable of persuading and influencing others in a variety of situations, and you've been graded on a scale between exceptional and unsatisfactory as exceeding competence here. And an example has been given. I'm just going to read out what the example says. Example 2. Situation. Was instructed to check the home address of a suicidal missing person. Action. Upon arrival at the missing person's home address, it was obvious that someone was within as the door was open. Due to the concerns for the male, my colleague and I went in. I shouted loudly and clearly, stating that we were the police, as I did not want to scare the male. As we approached the living room, the male was holding a knife to his chest area. I engaged in communication with the male, using reassuring and soft language to build a rapport with him. Once I built the rapport and the male was engaging, I issued instructions to the male regarding the knife. Once it was safe to do so, I relayed clear and concise information to the ACR and my supervisors. Result? The male put the knife down and did not harm himself or anyone else. He became calm and compliant. The supervisors were able to make quick decisions on the information I had passed. Because his behaviour caused fear and alarm, the male was arrested for a contravention of Section 38 of the Criminal Justice and Licensing Act and brought into police custody. By communicating effectively and remaining calm, I ensured the safety of everyone involved. Do you remember that incident?
I do, yeah.
And do you remember that being used as an example of good practice in your appraisal?
Yeah.
Should we understand from the information recorded there that you identified yourself? So this was written by you, is that right? It's an example that you gave?
Yeah, I think it was written by myself.
So you identified for yourself that your communication skills had been important here and that you had begun by speaking calmly and using soft language, reassuring and soft language in order to build a rapport with the male. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's something you recognised had been important. That you had then issued instructions regarding the knife. Would that be to put the knife down or something to that effect?
Yeah, something similar.
And you had then updated the ACR, that's the Area Control Room.
Yes.
What would be the purpose of you updating the ACR?
Just so they knew what was happening. Yeah.
Why might they want that information?
Just so they could assess the situation from where they were if we needed any additional support.
Okay. The approach that you describe here, is it an approach that you followed in other knife calls since?
Yeah.
Is it an approach that has been effective on other occasions?
Sorry, I'm struggling to think of the other times I've attended knife calls.
Well, you said on the other occasions you hadn't had to use a baton or a spray,
Yeah.
and you had used communication.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've perhaps used a similar approach, calm tone, reassuring voice, building rapport,
Yeah.
in other cases too, and whether that might have been effective on other occasions too.
Yeah.
We can take that down from the screen now. Thank you, Ms. Drury. I want to move on to ask you some questions, Constable, about the 3rd of May 2015, and we'll begin with your journey to Hayfield Road. I understand that you travelled in a van with Constable Smith,
I did, yeah.
that you approached from the hospital side of Hayfield Road,
Yeah.
which is the opposite end from the roundabout with Gallagher's pub.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that right?
correct.
Your van can be seen I think, on the CCTV footage, on the evidence video timeline. I don't know whether you have seen any of this, if you've been
Yeah, I've
following
seen
the
some.
evidence already. But what I would like to do is play a section of about 5 minutes, just so that we can be clear where in the sequence of events you arrive at the scene, and so that we can be clear about what had already happened before you arrived there. So I'd like to play from 7:16:22 to 7:21:31. And in the seconds before we stop at 7:21:31, you should see your van pulling up. So we'll just watch that 5-minute section in its entirety to begin with. Can I ask you if you were able to, Constable, to keep an eye on the footage, but also listen to the airwaves, because I want to ask you some questions about the airwaves, and I'll remind you that you've got the spreadsheet handy as well. Thank you.
What was your name, please?
So for 4-1 Charlie. Right. I need you to divert to Henry Road, a disturbance ongoing, male armed with a knife, African looking male chasing someone that may be carrying a knife, described as big with muscles, about 6 feet tall, wearing a white t-shirt and dark coloured jeans. There's an individual coming in about standby. Yeah, well, that's another grade 1 call coming in for the Victoria Road, Kirkcaldy, male armed with a knife. Male in possession of a large knife, a black male wearing white t-shirt and jacket, walking along the street with a large knife in his right hand, about a 9-inch blade.
Control from 411. All units defend that. Bear in mind officer safety. Was there an ARV and a dog as well, please?
Control from 4-1 Alpha. Go ahead. We're heading there. That's 2 separate locuses. We'll go to Victoria Road before Henry Road. The last call can be monitored by Romeo Victor. Roger.
Papa Whiskey 101 and 104 also attendant.
Alpha Control from 4-1 Alpha. Can we try to get house numbers of the 2 informants, please? Roger, 1 is... The second caller is from... That's a further call advising the male is in Hayfield Road near to Gallagher's pub. That's the take out at both sides. I think the Victoria Road call, Locus, is probably incorrect.
Control from 401. The update of ARV and dog units over.
I believe that dog unit is en route.
Rumble review, we're organising an ARV as well. Stand by.
Alpha Control from 4-1 Alpha. Go ahead. Victoria Road probably was taken Locus, Hayfield Road. Roger, Hayfield Road, that was the last place he was seen, near Gallagher's pub. Roger, that's us approaching Locust. That's another call saying he was seen walking in the direction of the hospital, in the middle of the road. Yes. That's on Hayfield Road heading in that direction.
Inspector Stewart in the control room to the set attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from a an ARB perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feed back to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I'm listening. It's described as male, black, well-built, 6 foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt, dark-coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Monday 4, control, keep off us. Somebody activated the emergency button.
Officer injured! PC shot! Male! Control acknowledge, officer injured.
What's the locate?
We just got blue lights stopped, adjacent to Gallagher, we're approaching. Thank you!
We can stop there, please, and pause it there. So there was a lot of information to take in there in terms of what you could see and what you could hear. But can I ask you at the outset whether you recognised your van approaching and stopping on Hayfield Road just in the 3 seconds leading up to 7:21:31?
Yeah.
If we look at the reconstruction tile above the footage, which gives a bird's eye view, do I understand correctly that the van that you and Constable Smith were travelling in is the one that's facing towards the roundabout?
Yeah, that's correct.
So do we see and have we heard that by the time that you and Constable Smith arrived at the scene, there were 2 other vans already there?
Yes.
And do you see them on the reconstruction
I do,
tile?
yeah.
And we've heard that Constables Walker and Payton arrived first, driving the big transit van. That's the one that's parked closest to you. Followed by Constables Short and Tomlinson in what I gather was called the fish van,
Yeah.
which is the smaller white van closer to the roundabout. So we heard a number of transmissions during that 5-minute period, and I don't intend to go through them again. But did you hear in particular a transmission to the effect that an officer was injured, PC Short?
Yes.
And did you see that Constable Payton's emergency button was activated? That flashed up on the screen in front of us.
Yes.
So all of these things had happened before you arrived on the scene. So we'll come back to this, but for now, can we please go to your inquiry statement and look at paragraph 8? You were asked by the inquiry team to describe what you were thinking and how you were feeling on your way to Hayfield Road. And you said, my adrenaline was running en route to the incident and I was trying to process all the information being passed. After the first emergency button was pressed and I heard PC Short saying her name, I thought something bad had happened due to someone pressing their emergency button. I then heard someone else shout over the radio something similar to officer injured. I'm not sure at which point I thought this, either after I heard PC Short on the radio or after I heard officer injured, but a thought went through my head that PC Short had been stabbed. This was due to a knife being mentioned. I felt extremely panicked at the thought of this, and various thoughts and emotions were going through my head. Now, we've just listened to the airwaves, and does it appear that it was in fact a male officer who said, officer injured, PC Short, male?
Yeah, so this has been the first time I've had the chance to listen to the radio transmissions, but at the time I think I've just got confused by hearing PC Short, and I've just had it in my head that it's been Nicole, PC Short that said that.
All right. Did you recognise the voice of the male officer making the transmission?
Yes, I think that would be PC Alan Payton.
You say in your statement that a thought went through your head that PC Short had been stabbed, and that was because a knife had been mentioned.
Yes.
Is that right? Can we turn to paragraph 10 of your statement, please? You were asked what was it about the nature of the call that concerned you. You said, my main concern was that there was a man with a large knife and that one of my colleagues had potentially been seriously injured. I had very little police experience of dealing with knife-related calls, and at this time I knew very little details about the call and the extent of injuries received to any officer. As mentioned above, I had assumed that PC Short was seriously injured. I assume this thought entered my mind momentarily, due to the UK terror level at the time suggesting that an attack was highly likely, and a briefing from the beginning of the year regarding intelligence, regarding a female being attacked, and watching events on the news. As previously stated, my experience in dealing with incidents such as these was minimal. I want to ask you a few questions about that. You mention a terror level which suggested that an attack was highly likely. Can you help me to understand why the terror level crossed your mind on the way to Hayfield Road?
I think because during that time we were getting memos saying that an attack was likely. I had just left the police college, so I had no experience of dealing with calls like this. So I think various things were running through my head. And at that time, there was a big focus on the terror level. For instance, we were to arrive at our work in our own clothes. We weren't allowed to wear our police uniform. We weren't to be identified as a police officer outside work. I think we were to be double crewed at all times. We weren't allowed to be single crewed, and that was because of the terror level.
Would the terror level have crossed your mind if the male with the knife had been white?
Yes.
Can we turn to your perk statement, please? Page 7, second last paragraph. I'm going to read out a paragraph from your perk statement now, Constable. At that point, my immediate thought was that PC Nicole Short had potentially been stabbed. It is rare that an emergency button is pressed, so when they are pressed, you take it seriously. And because of the nature of this call, I made the conclusion that she may have been stabbed. I was also thinking at that point of the Lee Rigby incident in London, mainly due to the fact of the coloured male and the potential terrorist connotations. In addition, I recall that there were many emotions going through my mind, and I reminded myself of the briefing of when I first started at the turn of the year, where intelligence had been received by the police that there would be a potential attack on a female police officer. I was actually shaking physically. It was uncontrollable. You don't really get training to deal with this sort of incident. It was fair to say that I was panicking at that point and was fearful for my own safety. You mention thinking of the Lee Rigby incident in London. Can you explain how the murder of Lee Rigby influenced your thinking on the morning of the 3rd of May?
I think I've mentioned that it's because it's been as part of the memos. It was mentioned.
The terrorist memos?
Yeah, if I remember correctly. So I think that's the only reason I've mentioned that in my statement.
Okay. You mention a coloured male and potential terrorist connotations. Can you explain what you were thinking?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that when I've said coloured, I've said that in error. I've never meant to cause offence or. I've just said the wrong word. I was obviously very young in service. Yeah, I'm not meant to cause offence for that. I've just been describing the male, and I know that's not the acceptable word to use. Yeah, but I was just, when I've said the potential terrorist connotations, I've been trying to explain the memos about the UK terror level that we had received. It's maybe not worded how I would have liked to have in my statement.
Right. And was there an association in your mind between the colour of the man's skin and the potential terror connotations?
No, I think I've just thought of that because I genuinely had a belief that PC Short had been stabbed. And I was trying to think that it's a Sunday morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm staying Kirkcaldy. I'd never heard anything like this happening before. So yeah, it did go through my mind momentarily.
You say that you didn't mean to cause any offence in using the word coloured. Do you understand now that that's a term considered to be offensive?
Yeah.
And is that something that you appreciated back in 2015?
I think back then I was trying to be polite. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And I've obviously made a mistake and used the incorrect term.
You mention a briefing concerning intelligence about an attack on a female officer. Do you recall anything about that briefing? How you were briefed, for example? Was it an email, on the internet, in person?
I can't remember. I think it's been when I've been at Tullyallen. But I'm struggling to remember any details about it.
Are you clear in your recollection that you did receive a briefing?
I think so, yeah.
Is there a possibility you could be mistaken about that?
I don't know.
How did you feel on your way to the incident?
I'd say before I heard the emergency button, I felt okay. I felt reassured that there was more experienced officers going. But after the emergency buttons were activated and I heard that an officer was injured, I was feeling scared.
I think if we scroll down, we have scrolled down. At the very bottom of page 7 of your perk statement, second last line, you say that it was literally terrifying.
Yeah.
Now, you had, by this point, left the police college and you'd had officer safety training at the police college. Did that make any difference to how you were feeling, knowing that you'd had that training?
Yes and no. Obviously, when you do your training, it's in a controlled environment, and I didn't really know what I was going to. So I didn't have much experience in actually applying what I'd learned in my officer safety training, if that makes sense.
Is it perhaps a little bit like having passed your driver's test? You know the theory,
Yeah.
you've made the grade, but you don't have any actual practical experience.
Yeah.
All units were attending this call, including some very experienced officers. Did that make any difference to the way that you were feeling, knowing that they were going to?
Yeah, as I said, I did feel some reassurance that the whole team was going and there was a great deal of experience on that team at the time. Yeah.
Including your tutor constable, PC
Yes.
Smith, who had at that time 10 years service and was an OST trainer.
Yes.
Did it make a difference to how you felt knowing that he was with you?
Yeah.
Can we go back to the airwaves for a moment? If you
Yes.
could perhaps look at the spreadsheet. Page 3. At 7:20 and 13 seconds, there was a message from Inspector Stewart in the control room. Do you see that?
Yes.
Inspector Stewart, area control room, to the set attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback through straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you recall hearing that message on your way to Hayfield Road?
No.
You don't. But you would have, in fact, been in the car in the van, I
Yes.
should say, at that time. Looking at that transmission now, what do you understand to be the purpose of the message?
He was going to assess if an ARV would be deployed.
And what was he expecting from the officers at the scene?
For them to feedback what they saw on the ground.
Was that to assist him with his assessment?
Yes.
Did you yourself provide any feedback after you arrived at the scene?
I don't think so.
Why would that be?
At that time, I only had 3 weeks actual police service. I was still learning how to use the radio at that time. I don't think I would have been confident enough in passing transmissions.
I'm going to move on now to ask you some questions about what happened at Hayfield Road after you arrived. What did you do when you arrived at Hayfield Road?
I immediately went to PC Nicole Short.
Where was she?
So when we've arrived on Hayfield Road, I've saw her kind of like staggering on the pavement, holding onto her side.
Let's get a picture up. That might help you to explain what was going on. Can we look at image number 4 from the ALI second brochure, please, Mr. Ray? Okay, so do you recognise that as being a bird's eye view of Hayfield Road?
I do, yes.
It's similar to the reconstruction tile that we were looking at earlier. We see the transit van, the fish van, and the van that you and Constable Smith arrived in. Now, we have technology that will allow you to touch the screen and leave a circle mark. So I should ask you before we do that, are you happy with the position of your van and indeed the other vehicles on this reconstruction? Do they look to be approximately correct?
I feel like we were closer to where the bus stop, you know, the yellow markings.
Yes. All right. So you think that your van was perhaps closer to the yellow markings?
Yeah.
So up a bit as you look at the page. All right. Other than that, do you think this looks to be broadly accurate?
Yeah.
So you were a passenger in the van?
I was, yes.
And can you firstly explain, please, where Constable Short was when you first saw her? You described her staggering, but where was she when you first saw her? If you just touch the screen.
Can't remember exactly, but I think she was on the pavement.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have been a bit there.
You describe her staggering across the road. If we change the technology, we can now give you an arrow. And if you could use your finger to draw an arrow in the direction that she was staggering. All right, I think the number 2 perhaps hides the arrow. That's all right. Can we make it a little bit bigger and it might be easier to see? Well, I think Mr. Drury is just going to take that one away and we can do it again. So that was the direction that she was going. Now, that arrow is pointing towards the bus stop. Was that the direction that she was moving?
I think so, yeah.
So she was on the pavement close to the bus stop, moving closer to the bus shelter. Is that correct?
As we've approached, I've just seen her kind of walking on the pavement. I can't remember if she was walking towards the bus stop or if she was going to go past it. Or
she was, in any event, on the pavement to the far side of the bus stop.
Yes.
When you first arrived. You described her as staggering. Can you describe her demeanour when you first saw her?
Yeah, she looked petrified.
You said that on arrival you went straight to her. Was that on the pavement?
Yeah, so I've got out the passenger's side and I think I've went round the front of the bonnet of our van and went to her.
You described her as petrified?
Mm-hmm.
When you approached her, what did you say?
First of all, she was like hyperventilating, struggling to get her words out. I've said, I think in my statement, I thought she'd been winded. She was really struggling to get her words out. I've asked her like over and over again, like, what's happened? Are you okay? Are you okay? Initially, she struggled to get any words out, and then she's managed to say, I think she'd been hit. And then she was just in tears, crying and upset.
What did you do?
I just kind of put my arms around her and tried to reassure her, tried to ask her if she was injured, kind of tried to check her over. I didn't see any injuries at that time.
You didn't see any injuries. Was she complaining of pain?
I can't remember if she was complaining of pain.
Where was Constable Smith?
So I think when he got out the driver's side, he's initially went to Nicole also, and he's told me to look after Nicole. And then I think he's left us and went across the pavement to the other side of the road.
When you were with Nicole Short, could you see where Constable Smith had gone?
No, I can kind of see he ran diagonally across the road, but I couldn't see where he was going.
And you couldn't see where he'd ended up?
No.
So after you had reassured Constable Short, what did you do next?
I think I started to walk up the pavement, and that's when I've looked across the road and I saw where all the other officers are, and the male being restrained.
Did you make your way over to the scene of the restraint?
I did, yeah.
What I'd like to do now is look at the descriptions of the restraint that you've given in your statements and then ask you some further questions. If we can go to your inquiry statement first, please. Paragraph 19. So you're asked to provide as much detail as you could, and your statement reads as follows. As I walked on the pavement with PC Short, I observed several officers diagonally across from me on Hayfield Road on the pavement, south. I could see a black male lying on the pavement, and he appeared to me to be lying chest down with his head raised, facing towards the direction of Gallagher's pub. At this point, I observed his arms and legs flaying around, and he appeared to be attempting to force himself up using his arms. I recall seeing PC Payton at his head with his baton extended, attempting to force the male's arm behind his back. PC Walker had the top part of his body over the top of the male's back. PC Smith was at the male's feet, and PC McDonough was kneeling next to his left-hand side and removing his leg restraints. I could see the male still struggling, so I left PC Short on the side of the pavement and ran over to offer assistance to my colleagues. Now, if we can look, before I ask you any questions, we'll also look at your perk statement. Page 9, please, Ms. Drury. And let's look at the first two paragraphs there. As we walked on the pavement, I became aware of several officers diagonally across Hayfield Road on the south pavement. I could clearly see a black male lying on the pavement face down. His chest was on the ground, but his head was up off the ground and turned to the right towards Gallagher's pub. His feet were closest to me and his head was furthest away, facing south. At that point, his arms and legs were still flying, kicking out, arms flaying, and he was trying to force himself up, using his arms like a press-up type movement. We seem to have lost the screen. It was page 9. Thank you. At that time, I saw several officers trying to restrain him by pushing him to the ground. Alan Payton was at the male's head, and I think he was trying to restrain the male with a baton. There is a technique where you place the baton through between a person's arms and his body, which takes the person's arm behind their back with the baton extended. I don't remember what arm PC Payton was using for this technique, but I do remember that the male, who I now know as Shekubayo, but I refer to as Shek, was so muscular that this technique was not working properly, and he, Shek, was preventing its correct application by forcing his arm against it. I saw Craig Walker lying across the top of Sheku's back towards his upper half in an effort to stop him forcing himself to his feet. This was effectively to assist in pushing him to the ground. Craig only had the top half of his own body over Shek. I could see Alan Smith was at Shek's feet, and he was trying to stop Shek kicking out. I don't recall if Alan was using his knees or his arms to achieve this. James McDonough was kneeling next to Shek's left side and was again getting his leg restraints out of the holder on his utility belt. At this time, I left Nicole standing on a north footpath, and I immediately ran across the road to assist my colleagues. I went to Shek's left-hand side first, and then I went round his head to his right-hand side, where Ashley Tomlinson was kneeling down next to Shek. I actually think he had one knee on Shek's leg, again attempting to pin it down. So there was a lot of information in both of those statements. Again, if there are differences between what you said in your inquiry statement and what you said in your PERC statement, should we prefer your PERC statement?
Yes.
And that's because your memory was fresher in 2015 than it is today. Similarly, if there's more detail in your PERC statement, would that simply be because your memory was better then than it is now? So I want to ask questions about what each person was doing and where they were. Let's begin with the male, who you now know as Sheku Bayo. In your inquiry statement, you described him as lying chest down, head raised, arms up and legs flaying around, attempting to force himself up using his arms. And in your PERC statement, you described him as lying on the pavement, face down, chest on the ground but head up off the ground, arms and legs flying, trying to force himself up using his arms like a press-up. And does that accord with your memory today of the
Yes.
position that he was in and what he was doing? Constable, can I ask you to demonstrate the position that Mr. Bayo was in, please, if you wouldn't mind coming into the centre of the room and taking up that position?
I think he's been like that.
So the audio might not pick you up, so I'll perhaps repeat what you're saying. So,
Yes, I think his chest been down, but his head's been turned to the side.
right, so you're lying chest down,
Yeah.
prone, with your arms, as you've described in your statement, in a press-up position, and you're lifting your chest and your head is turned to the side.
Yeah.
And that's the position that Mr. Bayo was in. Thank you. Please come back to the witness chair. I want to ask you now about the officers, about what they were doing. Let's begin with Constable Payton. You said in your inquiry statement that he was at Mr. Bayo's head with the baton extended, attempting to force his arm behind his back. And in your PERC statement, you described that technique in quite a lot of detail. Now, I think we should have a baton. Do we have a baton, Mr. Ray? I wonder if you can assist us in understanding what Constable Payton was doing with the baton, either standing where you are or coming into the centre of the room, if that would be safer.
I'm trying to think how to explain it.
It might be difficult to do on yourself, I suppose, but as best you can, if you could demonstrate and explain the technique.
So he's kind of had the baton like under, try to rotate the arm round.
Okay, so you're demonstrating a technique whereby you put the baton under the arm.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's hard to do on myself, but if my arm's down, it's like going under to try and rotate the arm round.
Okay, so should the baton end up between the arm and the body?
So it would end up between the shoulder blade and the body, I think.
Sorry, could you do that for me again?
Yeah,
So you're putting the
It's really
baton...
hard to try and explain, but yeah, I think it's...
I'll perhaps try to describe what you're doing, if it helps you
Yeah.
to focus on what you're doing.
So I think it was under.
Okay, so the baton's behind your shoulder, and it's
it
being...
would rotate your arm round.
Okay.
I think.
And how does it do that? How does the batten catch on your arm to rotate it round?
I think it goes under your shoulder, so it's, I don't know, it forces your arm round.
Right, so it's a technique that involves placing the batten between the upper arm and the body?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to picture it on someone else. I've never done it on myself before. Yeah, that's...
Okay, grand. All right, we'll put that to one side. Thank you for explaining that. Let's consider Constable Walker. You said in your inquiry statement he had the top part of his body over the top of the male's back, and in your perk statement you said Constable Walker was lying across the top of Mr. Bio's back in an effort to stop him forcing himself to his feet. This was effectively to assist in pushing him to the ground. He only had the top half of his body over Bio. Can you help me to understand precisely what position Constable Walker was in? I wonder again if it might be easiest for you to simply demonstrate the position that he was in. Thank you.
So if the male's been lying there, I think it was kind of lying like this across his back.
Sorry, where was the male in relation
So
to
the male
the...
would be here.
Okay.
And he would have had this part on over his back, so kind of like that, I think.
So you're indicating the side of his torso
Yeah.
across Mr. Bio's back and an arm. Can you say if it was his right arm?
I can't remember.
An arm outstretched,
Yeah.
going to the other side of his body.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. You said in your perk statement this was an effort to stop him forcing himself to his feet. This was effectively to assist in pushing him to the ground. How did that position that you demonstrated for us assist in pushing Mr. Bio to the ground?
I think because when I've looked across, Mr. Bio's been trying to use his arms to push himself up, so I think when PC Walker's done that, it's to push him back down.
Could you say how much force PC Walker was using?
No, just the top half of his body.
Where were his legs?
I can't remember exactly, but I think they would have been out to the side.
So not on Mr. Bio.
I don't think he was flat on him, no.
Turning to Constable Smith, you said in your inquiry statement he was at Mr. Bio's feet, and in your perk statement he was at his feet trying to stop Mr. Bio kicking out. And you didn't recall whether he was using his knees or his hands or arms to do that. Can you add anything to that description?
No, I'm sorry.
Constable McDonough, you explain in both statements he was kneeling to Mr. Bio's left side and removing leg restraints.
Yeah, I think so.
And Constable Tomlinson, you don't mention in your inquiry statement, but in your perk statement, you said he was kneeling next to Mr. Bio and you think he had one knee on his leg, attempting to pin it down.
Yeah, I can't remember.
You don't remember that now, but if it was what you said to the perk,
Yeah.
then would that have been your best recollection in June of 2015? Turning to the part that you played Constable, you explain in both your statements how you helped Constables Tomlinson and McDonough apply the fast straps. Now, I think we have a set of fast straps. And we've already had a demonstration as to how these work, but I wonder if you might be able to explain exactly what it was that you did to help secure the fast straps.
Yeah, so I just remember, I think it was PC McDonough and PC Tomlinson, were trying to feed the fast strap just underneath the knees, but I think they were struggling to get through the other side, so I think I've just pulled it through under his knees, and then PC Smith's taken it and fastened it.
So you helped to sort of feed the strap through beneath
Yeah.
Mr. Bio's knees, and that was the extent of your involvement in the restraint. Is
Yeah.
that correct? You said that the strap was fed underneath his knees. Where on his legs did Constable Smith secure the fast straps?
It was either above the kneecap or just below. I can't remember exactly.
But the area of the knees, either
Yeah.
either above or below. And what position was Mr. Bio in when the straps were secured?
I think he was still face down.
And I think if I were to say that in your perk statement you said that he was still chest down at
Yes,
that
yeah.
time, would that help jog your memory at all?
Yeah.
What happened after the straps were secured?
I think one of the officers just said roll him onto his side. So I think everyone's rolled Mr. Bio onto his left-hand side, I think.
Can we go back to your inquiry statement, please, paragraph 33? Where you say, after the leg restraints had been applied and he had been rolled onto his side, I recall the male had stopped struggling. I could see his face at this point and observed his eyes to be closed. What happened after Mr. Bio stopped struggling?
I think it was PC Payton, someone had said check his breathing, and I'm sure PC Payton's tapped him on the cheek, and then someone said he is breathing. I can't remember after that.
How long did you stay at the scene of the restraint?
Not long. Pretty quickly I was told to take up a point at the junction with Hayfield Road and Henry Road to prevent any vehicles from coming down.
I think you explain in your statements it was when the CID arrived that
Yeah.
they asked you to take up a traffic point.
Yeah.
And do you recall how much time passed between Mr. Bio becoming unresponsive, being rolled onto his side, and you going to take up the traffic point?
That was pretty quick, I think.
Let's look again at the spreadsheet. If you can look at 7:25:17, which is on page 7. Do you see an entry at 7:25:17 on the airwaves? Roger, this male now certainly appears to be unconscious, breathing, not responsive, get an ambulance for him. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And if you move forward to 7:29:30, which is on page 11, it's the entry second from the top. Control, can you get a move on with the ambulance? This accused is now not breathing. CPR is commencing, over. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So it looks as though Mr. Bio was unresponsive for more than 4 minutes before it became apparent that he wasn't breathing and CPR was commenced. The first airwave call that we looked at was 7:25:17. That was to the effect that he was unresponsive and an ambulance was requested. And the second airwave transmission was 7:29:30, to the effect that he wasn't now breathing and CPR was commencing. So that's just over 4 minutes. And I wonder if we can look really quickly at the evidence video timeline and at 7:27:31. Now, you're going to see some Snapchat footage, Constable, that will pop up at the far right hand of the screen. And it's very quick. But the timestamp is 7:27:31. There we are. Now, do you see yourself in that footage?
I do, yeah.
You do. We can take that from the screen. Thank you, Ms. Drury. So the timing there you'll see is 7:27 and 31. So it's about halfway through that 4-minute period. So unless you'd gone away and come back again, it looks as though you were at the scene of the restraint for about 2 minutes after Mr. Bayo became unresponsive. Would that fit with your recollection?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact timings. It all went really quickly, but...
In any event, we know that the CID came along and you were instructed to take up a traffic point. When you moved away from the scene of the restraint, what position was Mr. Bayo in?
I can't remember.
Was he still breathing?
Yeah, I don't remember a point that getting past that he wasn't breathing. So I think he must have been breathing when I've been told to go on the traffic point.
The traffic point was at the roundabout at Hayfield Road.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And from that traffic point, were you able to see what was happening on the ground?
No, I was facing out towards Hendry Road.
I see. Were you stopping any cars that were trying to turn from the roundabout into Hayfield Road?
Yeah.
So you would have had your back to the scene of the restraint?
Yeah.
By the time that you were stood down from your traffic point duties, had Mr. Bayo been taken to the hospital?
Yes.
Do you recall a conversation that you had at the traffic point with an Inspector K?
I do, yeah.
Well, tell me about that conversation.
So if I remember correctly, he's came up to me, I think when everyone else has left, all the other officers and the ambulance, and he's just told me to stay on that point until other officers come and relieve me. And I think maybe he's asked me if I'm okay, or if I was injured.
Okay.
And that's all.
Can we go to your perk statement, please, page 12? Paragraph 4. The third paragraph makes clear that you're talking about your discussion with Inspector K. And paragraph 4 reads, he told me to put on a hat and my yellow jacket, even though I had my high-vis vest on. I think it may have been because it was then raining and windy and I was shivering. He asked me if I was okay, but did not ask me anything about what had happened. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And did you go and put on a hat and a yellow jacket?
I think I did, yes.
Where did they come from?
It would have been our van, I assume.
So would you have had a jacket in the van?
Yeah.
Do all officers have a jacket that they carry with them in their vehicle?
Yeah, so normally you would take that out with you in the morning. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember if I did have my hat and jacket. Sorry, I can't remember. I think I would have had my hat.
And did you have a jacket?
I can't remember.
Okay. But you've said it's something that might have been in the van.
Yeah.
And would all officers have access to a jacket that they might take with them when they were out in a vehicle?
I would have had like a kit bag, and inside that would have had my yellow jacket, my hat, and like waterproof trousers, etc.
Do all officers have a kit bag?
Well, all officers are issued with them when they first join. So yeah.
And would there be an expectation that it would be something that you would take with you when you went out in a vehicle?
Yes, I think so. I think more importantly your police hat, and then your jacket. If you were doing like a points duty, or you'd probably be expected to have your jacket on.
Okay. So the kit bag contains items including a jacket, things that you might need when you're out and about performing your duties as an officer.
Yeah.
Now, we've heard that Mr. Bayo was wearing a T-shirt and that the weather wasn't very nice. You said that it was raining and windy and you were shivering.
Yeah, I can't remember now, but if that's what I've said, yeah.
I wondered whether anyone had fetched a jacket to put over Mr. Bayo.
Not that I saw.
I'm shortly going to ask you questions about your return to Kirkcaldy Police Office, but before I do that, can we go back to the Snapchat footage, please? 7:27:31. Now, I asked you if you could see yourself, and you said you could, and I ought to have asked you if you could point out where you are. I don't think we have the circle technology. We do? We do have the circle technology. If you could circle yourself, please.
Sorry, I've kind of covered someone else's head, but where the number 1 was.
Yes, you're now hiding behind the number
Yeah.
1, but yes, you can move it around if you like.
Okay.
Don't want to try to move it a bit so that
Yeah.
we can maybe see your face.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. We can make that go away. So you've circled the officer in the middle of 3 officers who are standing all in high vis.
Yeah, I think that's myself.
That's yourself. And there's an officer to your right, an officer to your left, and an officer crouching down immediately in front of you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Drury. Oops. What time were you stood down from your traffic point?
I can't remember.
I understand that you returned to Kirkcaldy Police Office with Constable McDonald
I did, yeah.
and you went to the canteen.
Yeah.
At the time that you arrived there, were all of the officers who had attended, other than Nicole Short, already there?
Yeah, I think so.
And we've heard that she went to the hospital. Did she arrive later on?
She did, yeah.
Can we look at paragraph 56 of your inquiry statement, please? You're asked about a conversation with Nicole Short. And halfway down that paragraph you say, I remember seeing bruises to both her knees and reddening to her neck. I'm unsure if she mentioned any other injuries she had. It was an exhausting day. I was struggling to retain information by this point. Let's also look at your perk statement, please, page 14, paragraph 5. Again, the last sentence, you're describing Nicole Short coming back from the hospital. She showed me bruises to her knees, both knees, and pointed to her neck on her right side, which I could see was red. So there's no mention in either of your statements of her having any other injuries.
Yeah.
Do you have any recollection today of her having any other injuries?
No, I can't remember.
Did you complain of any pain?
Sorry, I don't know.
Did you discuss what had happened at Hayfield Road with anybody?
Yeah, so when we went back, I can't remember who it was, but someone had mentioned that Nicole had been punched and stamped on, I think.
So was that a discussion that you were having, or is that a discussion that you overheard?
I think I was just present when it was being discussed. And I remember someone, I think I've maybe said what happens now, and someone in the group said there'll probably be an investigation.
Beyond that, do you recall there being any more discussion about what had happened
No.
at Hayfield Road? Were you given any advice about whether or not to discuss what had happened?
Yeah, I think when one of the senior officers just came to the canteen, they've said that we shouldn't discuss the incident.
Do you remember who that was?
No, sorry.
Do you remember an Amanda Given coming into the canteen?
I do, yeah.
If we can look at paragraph 50 of your inquiry statement, please. Sorry, 50, sorry. where you say, I recall Amanda Given attending at the canteen and stating that we should not discuss the circumstances of the incident. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
And was it Amanda Given who you referred to as a senior officer, or was it somebody other than
I think it was
her?
someone else.
Okay. Do you remember if it was a male officer or a female officer?
No, to be honest, we saw so many different officers that day that I didn't really know who they were.
Okay, we've heard that a number of officers were in the canteen that day,
Yeah.
including a constable, I think he was an Inspector Trickett, Conrad Trickett.
Yeah.
Do you remember receiving any advice from Inspector Trickett?
I remember him reading from like it's like a post-incident. It was basically like a briefing document. I think he just read it from the the document, but I can't remember what exactly he said.
And returning to Amanda Given, could we look briefly at your perk statement, please, page 14? Third paragraph down, you say, I seem to remember Amanda Given giving us advice, but I do not wish to discuss what was advised. I've not been instructed or advised to say this, it's purely what I wish to say. So certainly at the time that you gave your statement to Perk, you seem to recall her giving you some advice.
Yeah, now I genuinely can't remember what that advice was. I think I've been under the impression that the advice was essentially legal advice, and I think that's why I've said I didn't want to discuss it. I didn't know what obligation I had to discuss it, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes, I'll come on to ask you some questions about that in a moment. Did you fill out your notebook?
I didn't know.
Okay. And why not?
I think that at that time, because I was so young in service, usually PC Smith and I would sit down together and complete my notebook at other incidents, and he would go through exactly like how to lay my notebook out, what information I had to put in, and we just didn't discuss about even completing our notebooks. I think we were both in that much shock that we've just not got round to it.
Were you given any advice about filling out your notebook?
No, not that I could remember.
Were you given any advice about giving a statement?
Not that I can remember.
Were you told whether you were being treated as a witness or as a suspect?
I can't remember.
Do you recall what your understanding was of your status on the 3rd of May?
No, I didn't know.
Were you asked to provide an operational statement at any time?
I think I was a few days after the incident. But I can't recall a specific date.
Okay. Was it possible that you were seen by a DCI Hardy and a DI Wilson around about the 7th of May?
Yeah, possibly.
And do you recall whether your status was confirmed at that time?
I think there was mention that we were being treated as a witness, but I don't think my solicitor was happy, and we were told that we wouldn't be providing a statement at that time on the basis of our legal advice.
Okay. Do you know what it was that was the source of the unhappiness? What was it that you needed to hear from,
I'm not sure.
from the police? Okay. I want to conclude by asking you some questions about race, and firstly about the training that you had at Tullyallen. What training did you get when you were a police recruit on equality and diversity?
So I think we undertook a week's training on diversity during week 1 at college.
What did it cover?
I can't remember exactly.
What did it cover in relation to race in particular?
I can't remember exactly what it covered. I think it was just about treating everyone fairly and with respect.
How did you put what you'd learned into practice in your day-to-day policing?
Yeah, just treating everyone with respect and with fairness.
Were you taught in the course about unconscious bias?
I can't remember.
Have you yourself ever made assumptions about a person based on the colour of their skin?
No.
Do you recall how many officers there were in Kirkcaldy back in 2015?
How many officers worked in Kirkcaldy?
Yeah.
No.
Roughly?
So I think there was 5 teams, and a team was maybe 10, 12 people.
Okay, so 50, 60 officers perhaps?
Yeah, but then there's all different departments like CID, community.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe
How many of your colleagues were black?
none, I don't think.
How many of your colleagues were from other ethnic minority groups?
None.
Prior to May 2015, did you ever encounter racist jokes or comments at work?
No.
Comments that might be perceived as racist?
No.
Did you ever encounter jokes or comments about Islam that might have been offensive or perceived as offensive?
No.
Have any of your colleagues ever displayed that sort of behaviour in front of you?
No.
And if they did, how would you react?
I would challenge it. I'd speak to them. If I thought it was necessary, I would raise it to management.
How would you expect senior officers to respond if they witnessed that type of behaviour?
Yeah, to take it seriously.
Earlier in your evidence, we looked at a description that you had given of Mr. Bayo back in 2015, and you described him as coloured. And I have no doubt that you accept that that use of language was offensive. It's a term that you used in a formal statement to the PERC. Is it a word that you've ever used around Kirkcaldy Police Office?
No.
At the time of Mr. Bayo's death, what awareness did you have about public concern around the use of force by the police, particularly against black men?
I don't think I had any.
And from your own experience, to what extent was the use of force a matter of concern for police officers policing in Scotland?
I don't think it was a concern.
You may be aware that there have been a number of high-profile deaths in police custody in the UK, including a number that have followed from restraint. At the time of Mr. Bayo's death, were you aware of high-profile cases in the UK where a person has died in police custody and restraint has been a matter of public concern?
No, I wasn't aware.
At the time of Mr. Bayo's death, were any measures in place to share information and learning about deaths in custody?
I don't know.
Was information and learning from other police forces across the UK shared with Police Scotland?
I don't know.
And how confident do you feel in the training that you've received about race-related issues and deaths in custody?
I don't recall having any specific training relating to race and deaths in custodies.
What was your awareness of the black community in Kirkcaldy in 2015?
None.
Had you been involved in community relation work with the black community?
No.
Were you aware of colleagues taking part in such work?
No.
What experience did you have of dealing with members of the black community, whether as witnesses or suspects or victims of crime?
Not very much, I don't think, other than maybe taking a witness statement or... Yeah.
Had you taken witness statements from black people?
Yeah, I think I would have. I can't remember specifically.
What was the relationship like between the police and the black community in Kirkcaldy in 2015?
I don't know.
What sort of stereotypes are you aware of about black people generally, or black men specifically, in the context of criminal justice?
I'm not aware of any stereotypes.
Are you aware that black men may be perceived as more likely to resist or more likely to be violent or to have superhuman strength or size?
No.
You're not aware of that?
No.
Do you have any views along those lines?
No.
Can we turn to your perk statement, please? Page 10. Paragraph 1 of page 10. Perhaps just scroll up a little bit so we can see at the bottom of the previous page. This is a description of Mr. Bayo at the point in time that he stopped struggling. You say, I could see that the T-shirt was a tight fit as I could see the definition of his muscle through it, particularly at the back, and in particular his shoulder muscles. He was massive and is the biggest male that I have seen. Do you see that? And that's in your perk statement. Mr. Bayo was 5'10" tall, and he was 12 stone at 10 pounds. Is that massive?
No, but if I can just clarify, when I've said that, I've not meant that he's the biggest male I've ever seen in my life. I've meant that he's the biggest male I've ever seen at like an incident that I've been at, in terms like a police incident. So I've not, it's maybe not been described the best in that statement due to my lack of experience, but yeah, he wasn't the biggest male I've ever seen. So there was bigger guys on my team.
Yes, well, he was half PC Walker's body weight. PC Walker's 25 stone.
When I've said he's massive, I've been talking about his muscles.
Is it possible that you made assumptions about Mr. Bayo that influenced your interpretation or perception of the events on the 3rd of May?
No, that was just my perception of how I've seen him.
Bear with me just a second.
Yeah.
Wait. Subject to any further matters that you or the assessors might wish me to explore, that concludes my examination.
Thank you. Are there any Rule 9 applications? Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Moyer. Now, Constable, one of you would withdraw to the witness room while I hear some submissions. Now, there are seats for the two of you, so perhaps both come to the table. Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you. The first issue that I would like to explore is based on the use of the word coloured, and it's split into two parts. First of all, questions on appraisal, and secondly, questions on training. The first in relation to appraisal, the inquiry has heard that appraisals are carried out to provide, for example, feedback of things that you do well and you might perhaps do better and work on in the future. And we saw an example of that and the witness being taken to that. What I would like to ask the witness is whether or not, since the time of her statement and the use of the word coloured, whether or not anybody has asked either for an explanation of the term coloured, that being from the PERC officer who asked the statement, to police Scotland, to anyone in Police Scotland, to anyone that she'd spoken to in the Federation. Essentially, did anybody or has anybody challenged her on the use of the term, any of those institutions? The second part is in relation to training, and I heard my learned friend cover a number of the questions that she was given. But on the issue of race training, I wonder whether or not anyone had spoken to them about using the word colour as being an offensive term. My learned friend did cover many of the questions in relation to race training, but I would like to ask whether or not it covered the use of offensive terms, did it cover the use of racial stereotypes, and my learned friend asked whether or not it covered unconscious bias, but the witness wasn't asked, were you asked how to guard against unconscious bias? Now, I appreciate the witness says that she can't remember, but any of these questions might trigger a memory that she's able to help the inquiry with. I make these inquiries in relation to this particular matter because as early back as the Lawrence inquiry in February 1999, over 22 years ago, the use of the term coloured was explored as a term which suggested it might not be a term of overt racism or discrimination, but the use of such words, and I'm quoting now from paragraph 6.3 of that inquiry, the use of such words which are now well known to be offensive display at least insensitivity and a lack of training. And it goes on to explore the issues of the lack of challenging such terminology in terms of institutional racism. The next issue I would like to explore with this witness is when she said that Mr. Bio stopped struggling, and her evidence, this is at paragraph 159.4, what happened after Mr. Bio stopped struggling? I think it was PC Payton, or sorry, someone had said check his breathing, and I'm sure PC Payton tapped him on the cheek, and then someone said he's breathing. Well, I'd like to explore with her the question of why or how someone would tap someone in the cheek to test whether or not they were breathing, whether or not that would happen, and indeed ask her in terms of whether or not PC Payton slapped Sheikh Bio. I think she said in another statement that PC Payton patted Mr. Bio on the cheek. So I would like to clarify that matter. The final issue that I would like to raise is the issue of faking it. And that's to be found at her statement PERC 274, page 10 of 17. The reason for that is it appears that she considers that Sheikh Bio might have been faking it, i.e. faking unconsciousness, and she mentions the slap in respect of that, and I'd want to explore with the witness, did she think that what was being tested there was to see if Mr. Bio was faking it? And I would respectfully consider that to be important because there may be questions about whether or not it is more likely that black people might be seen as trying to fake it in terms of injury or, as in this case, being unconscious. And I would like to follow that up with one of the questions that my learned friend already asked was, is it possible that you've made any assumptions about him faking it based on the fact that he is black?
Thank you. Mr. Moore.
Sir, the three questions, which are all interrelated, that I would wish to raise, all relate to the aftermath in the canteen area. So you will have heard some questions by learned counsel regarding the canteen, but not going into these areas. And the three questions I would wish to deal with all relate to in the canteen, in the aftermath of the incident, were you or any of your colleagues concerned about whether allegations of racism may come up due to Mr. Bio's ethnicity? During the time spent in the canteen at Kirkcaldy Police Office, did you or any of your colleagues raise the issue of Mr. Bio's ethnicity? If so, what was the context? And during the time spent in the canteen at Kirkcaldy Police Office, did anyone raise concerns about potential allegations of racism? If so, what was said and by whom? And those are the three questions, all interrelated effectively to matters within the canteen that I would seek to raise.
Yes, well, I shall allow these questions. Mr. Meyer, if you return to your seat meantime, and if we could have a rearrangement to allow Ms. Mitchell to sit in the questioning seat. And we could have the witness back, please. Constable Good, you're going to be asked questions first by Ms. Mitchell, who represents the Sheku Bio families. Ms. Mitchell.
Officer Good, I'm going to ask you questions around the use of the word coloured that you used, and we've heard your evidence in relation to that matter. We've also heard that during the course of your training you get regular appraisals, and that sometimes that you get feedback on things you do well and things you might do better in the future. And that's the purpose of appraisals. Is that correct?
Yeah.
When you gave your statement and used the word coloured, did the representative from Park Morris Roads, did he ask you for any explanation of your term of the use of the word
can't
coloured?
remember.
Did anyone from Police Scotland, subsequent to the giving of the statement, challenge you about the use of the term in your police statement?
I don't think so.
Would you remember if they had done something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
And do you remember if they have?
I don't think they have.
In fairness, would Police Scotland have the Perk statement?
Huh.
I don't think they would.
Yeah, I suppose, my lord, it's only been subsequently disclosed to Police Scotland.
Yes. I have the point.
Yes, I'm obliged. Has anyone, well, I'll leave that point. In relation to training, on the training you received, did anyone speak to you about the use of the word coloured as being an offensive term?
I can't remember.
Do you remember if your training covered the use of offensive terms at all?
I can't remember.
Do you remember whether it covered the use of racial stereotypes?
I can't remember.
Do you remember, you've told the inquiry that you can't remember whether or not it covered unconscious bias, but do you remember any training in relation to how to guard against unconscious bias?
No.
I'd like to move on and explore another issue with you now. Earlier in your evidence to the inquiry, you said you were asked what happened after Mr. Bio stopped struggling. And you said, I think it was PC Payton, or sorry, someone had said, check his breathing. And I'm sure PC Payton tapped him on the cheek and then someone said, he's breathing. I can't remember after that. Would you tap someone on the face to check if they were breathing?
So I think he's been trying to get like a pain response, was my understanding of what he was doing.
So he wouldn't be checking if he was breathing at that point, he was trying to get a pain response from him?
I'm not sure, I assume that's what he was doing, but I don't know.
I wonder if we can take you to Ms Drury, the Perk Statement 274 at page 10 of 17, and we look at the second paragraph. Do you see the second paragraph here? It reads, at that point I saw Alan Payton pat him on the cheek with his hand. I thought that Sheikh was faking it, as in he was faking that he was unconscious, as it would not be unusual for people to do that when they are being arrested. Now, can I ask you, when you saw Alan Payton pat him on the cheek looking for a pain response, was it because that did you link that with the idea that Sheikh Abayo might be faking it?
I don't know. I can't remember why I've said that.
Well, you say that you saw Alan Payton pat him on the cheek with his hand.
Yeah.
Was that a gentle pat?
I think it's just been like a tap.
The inquiry has heard evidence from another witness who's given evidence that PC Payton slapped Sheikh Abayo. Did he slap him?
Not that I can remember. I can only go on what I've said in my statement, and I think it was a pat.
So he patted him, is your evidence, and he tapped him?
Yeah.
And you're suggesting that would be enough to exhibit a pain response?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that the way that you would check someone for a pain response?
I think I would do the way I've been taught to rub the collarbone.
Okay. And have you been taught any other ways other than rubbing the collarbone?
No, I think that's the only way I've been taught.
So you haven't been taught to pat or tap or slap someone's face to check for a pain response?
No.
When you said that he was faking it, or you thought that Sheikh was faking it, as in he was faking it, that he was unconscious, is it possible you've made any assumptions about him based on the fact that he was black whilst doing that?
No. I think I've said that because he'd been so animated before, and then all of a sudden he stopped. In my experience, I'd never seen a person go unconscious before. As I said, I was only 3 weeks in the job, so it was all new to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. If you return to your seat and Mr. Moyle comes in. Mr. Moyle.
PC Good, I want to ask you some questions about what happened in the canteen afterwards, okay? That's all I want to ask you about. When you all went back to the canteen afterwards and your colleagues were all sitting about, was there any concern about allegations potentially being made against you of racism due to Mr. Bayo's ethnicity?
No.
Nothing at all?
No, I don't think so.
During your time in the canteen, did anybody raise any concern, any comments about the fact that Mr. Bayo was black?
No.
No mention of that at all?
No.
Did anyone, yourself perhaps, during all the time you were in the canteen, raise any concerns that there might be potential allegations made against you as police officers of racism because Mr. Bayo was black?
No.
Nothing at all?
Not that I can remember.
In the whole time you were sitting in the canteen, nobody raised the issue that he was a black man?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Jackson, as counsel for for Constable Good, do you have any questions? Thank you. Well, Constable Good, thank you very much for coming and giving evidence to the inquiry. The inquiry is about to rise and you'll then be free to go.
Thank you.